Hello, and welcome to Week 2 of our Introduction 2020 Faculty Perspectives series. We're so glad you've joined us today. Each week we will present 5 live interdisciplinary faculty perspectives centered around 5 different tracks. Those tracks in order are COVID-19, anti-racism, environment and climate change, engaged humanities, and finally, innovation and entrepreneurship. In a minute, I will turn things over to today's presenter, who will present for about 30 minutes, and then we will answer many of your questions live on camera. If you're a student watching live in Zoom, use the Q&A feature to ask questions of our presenter. We will also follow up after the program to any questions we don't answer live. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce you to Kimberly Johnson, a valued colleague here at the University of Oregon. She's the Assistant Vice Provost for Advising. Kimberly is also the author of a forthcoming novel called This Is My America. Today she's going to present on transformative education. Welcome, Kimberly. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for being here today. It's great.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here with you today and share with you just a little bit about myself as a student when I was here, and also let me just go through my area. And also the kind of experience that you can get here as a University of Oregon student. So much about the experience about being a student isn't just about what happens in the classroom, but it's also about the kinds of experiences that you can get working closely with faculty, with graduate students, the dialogues and conversations you have with the other students in your class, and the engaging experiences that you can have by being involved or working. But I want to talk just a little bit about me and who I am. I'm an Oregonian. In fact, I'm an Eugenian. I'm not sure if that's actually a term people say, but I grew up in Eugene. Eugene is my home. The University of Oregon is my community. I'm also an alumna of the University of Oregon. I went here as a student. I left after I graduated college, lived other places, lived on the East Coast, lived in California, and then I came home. And I've made the University of Oregon my home in a lot of different ways, which I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit about that. I'm also an advisor in a more informal way. In my role as Assistant Vice Provost for Advising, I'm a representative of the entire campus advising community that's there to support students. And I oversee a lot of different units, and I'll talk a little bit about those. I'm also a mentor here on campus, and that's informal and formal. There's a lot of different students who are involved in things that they want to seek support or look at administrators who they might be able to think through some of the things that they're doing. And so I serve in that way. I also serve as an advisor to an undergraduate group. And again, I'm a community member, and I mean that in not only the local context, but the global context. And lastly, I consider myself a writer, which is something new and exciting that I'll talk to you a little bit about. And just in terms of my photos, I just want to highlight, so the young women at the top are the group that I advise on campus. It's a historical Black sorority called Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority. We have a small chapter here, and I have been a member since I was an undergrad, that they work in community service on campus, lots of leadership. The other is a picture of me and my sister and our Vice Provost, Danica Scott, at a football game. That's something that we enjoy here at the University of Oregon, but that particular moment was actually the honoring of Lily B. Parker, who has been the named place for the Black Cultural Center. And then the bottom photo is at one of our graduations. So some students that I worked with closely, and our president and some other sort of community members were at the sort of the ground development of the Black Cultural Center. And the last photo is the duck with my son. So my son, he is an avid U of O. He loves the ducks. He loves green and yellow, and so that was a special moment for us. And I just want to share just a little bit about who I am. But advising. So here at the University of Oregon, when we think about student success and our students, the kinds of experiences that we want our students to graduate from the University of Oregon having a positive experience, to be well educated, socially responsible, and career ready. Again, it's not just about the kinds of academic experiences that you have, but all the ways in which we want you to have a whole experience as a student student and not only learning but growing. Part of the community that helps you do that is through advising. So on this campus, those of you that once you complete your advising module, you'll be reached out to by advisors in our community who will help you not only think about the things that you want to explore, the things that you're certain about, the things that you're not certain about, but also the ways in which that you can expand your interests, try new things. They're not just about doing academic advising and thinking about schedule planning and those kinds of pieces. In terms of how advising is at U of O, you're going to have other sessions, but I did want to talk to you just really briefly about my role. So I oversee 5 different advising unit portfolios here at the University of Oregon and work broadly across the different advising units. Some of the programs are through Pathway Oregon, which is an amazing program that's not only a scholarship program, but it also supports students. Other programs that we have are TRIO, SSS, the Office of Academic Advising, which is another wraparound support program, Tyson College and Career Advising, which many of you will likely enter and have lots of different advising questions that you might want to talk to advisors about, different kind of opportunities for you. And the last is I'm the director for the Center for Multicultural Academic Excellence, which is an advising unit that supports students who are seeking holistic support, who identify in a variety of different ways. We have specialists in our portfolio. We have a Black African American retention specialist, a Latinx retention specialist, a Native and Indigenous retention specialist, and an Asian Desi Pacific Islander retention specialist. And the photo that's there is really our students embracing each other at our new student fall retreat that we offer in the Center for Multicultural Academic Excellence as a way for our students to get connected. So I just wanted to share a little bit about who's here to help you through not only academic choices, but the rest of your experience, and especially those of you that, all of you that are new in this new environment of learning and living under the coronavirus. And our advisors have been continuing to work and support students. We're on Zoom calls, we're on video, we're outreaching, we're texting students, we have chat features so that they can reach us, and just so that we can always be there for students. So that's just a little bit about advising. When we think about anti-racism, not only as a rising topic that has become much more prevalent around the country and around the world, really, there's ways in which you can engage in anti-racist work. And you'll hear a lot from the faculty that will be sharing a little bit about snippets of their courses. I want to really just give you a broad sort of understanding that it is an expectation that every single U of O undergraduate student goes through cultural literacy requirement and understanding. And we have 2 different categories for that. One is U.S. difference, inequality, and agency, and the other is the global perspective. I think now more than ever there is an importance and I think a really understanding across all of our students who are incoming about how it's so important to understand inequalities in not only our country, but having a global perspective. We're living in a global environment, and it's so important. As a student, you have many, many options to choose. That's part of you building your own transformative education, is that you can select an academic area that you either are not familiar with or that you want to learn a lot more of. The thing that I like to challenge students with is that if there's something that they feel uncomfortable with, if there's something that they feel like they just haven't been exposed to enough, or it's something that they're really passionate about, those are the kinds of courses that academic advisors will help guide you to think through some of those options. When I was a student here at U of O, I came in thinking that I was going to be one major, and it was the major that my mom told me that I needed to be and study, and I didn't know, what other options there were, and so I entered my first term here at the U of O choosing a particular path, and it was actually the multicultural requirement, that's what it was called at the time, that exposed me to an Ethnic Studies 101 course and I absolutely loved it. It connected with all of my interest areas. I feel like it exposed me to understanding of people and culture in the U.S., and it really led me to the trajectory of not only wanting to continue my studies in these areas, but to come to U of O with that understanding of how are all the ways in which our student population, our community population can honor their backgrounds and experiences, and how can I be a part of building that and bringing that to the University of Oregon so that every single student feels valued and honored and respected, and that they have an opportunity to be anything that they really want to work hard towards being. So those are some things that I think are really exciting for you as a student, that regardless of what major that you are, that you can actually study it. When I talk with students about how do you do that? How do you study particular topics or issues, or even why is it important that if you're not studying a topic area that is about diversity, but maybe it's about, you're wanting to be a science major, or you really want to be a doctor one day, or maybe you want to be a lawyer one day, and you have a question of, why can't I just take law classes or legal studies courses, or why do I have to do these other requirements? And one of the reasons is that in public universities, and especially here at the University of Oregon, we really want you to have a liberal arts experience, a liberal arts education. And what does that mean? A liberal arts education means that you not only are looking at one particular academic discipline, but you actually are looking at how can it be interdisciplinary, and how can you learn different aspects and areas so that you can even have an interlevel exposure. When we look at businesses, when we look at corporations, whether they're nonprofit, if we look at service areas, if we look at our global economy, all the data shows us that those who have a broad educational experience, those that have experiences that they're able to understand how to work with other people from different factors, those companies, those organizations, those team dynamics are so much more successful. If you look at employer data, employers say that they want people who have a broad background, and so you can choose the major that you're passionate about, the major that you think is the best fit for you, but part of that experience is to not just sort of limit yourself in that understanding. So I want to sort of take a topic that is really relevant to our time period and have you think about how you could study it from a lot of different ways. So this particular area is the school to prison pipeline. You all are here to seek an educational experience. Before you got here, your educational experience looked really different from a lot of different ways. Some of you might have been, completed your GE for general education to be able to go on to, a university experience. Some of you might have, taken classes from home. Most of you probably this last term experienced what it's like to, learn remotely in your high schools. But the vast majority of you were in different high schools and that have different kinds of resources and assets and the ways in which you can have counseling support, or whether or not you actually have police involved in your sort of campus support and security that's there. But overall, if we think about the educational experience, that's the one common factor that every single U of O student has. And part of that educational experience is that at the University of Oregon, we want you to have access to the best education that you can have, the best experience that you can have. But if we want to study some of the issues that make it difficult for people to actually have access to additional opportunities, whether that's through educational opportunities or whether that's through work opportunities, is this concept of the school to prison pipeline, where if you look at data around the different kinds of ways in which schools can actually limit, hinder, have levels of discrimination, targeting, unfairness in the treatment of particular students, or even just the ability to work with a variety of different learners and people with different backgrounds, that their kind of educational experience can start a pipeline that is not to higher education or not to opportunities, but actually could be towards prison. And so if you wanted to think about this particular topic area, there's so many different ways that you could do it. So if you're really interested in the educational experience and you want to be a teacher or administrator, or you want to support the thought of education, thinking about how does race, class, gender, religion, ability impact the educational experience in that particular environment. Other aspects are just looking at from a philosophical level. How should we be teaching people? What should be taught in the classroom? Thinking about ethnic studies. Are we teaching people about some of the issues that we're seeing in this country that deal with racism that maybe were never covered in a high school or were a very limited view? There's so many different ways that you can think about studying one particular issue. And for students, that can be done in a lot of different ways, regardless of whatever major that you choose. If you want to become a lawyer, how does your understanding about all of these different kinds of issues from not just a legal perspective, but how does the law impact particular populations? If you're not aware of that, you actually might be working in a particular silo or have a certain kind of thinking process that holds bias or doesn't actually understand all the different ways in which legal systems can be set up that don't support or think about equity in the way that we should really be pushing forward. So the school to prison pipeline, I think, is a really interesting topic in our time. There's different ways in which you can be engaged with that. The Clark Honors College actually has a program called Inside Out, and I think that there's some adjustments being made this year in how that works, but we actually have Honors College students who take a course together, and they go once a week to the Oregon State Penitentiary and actually work with the inmates in learning. They're learning the same topics. They have texts, they're studying, they're having dialogues and conversation. Other ways that you can do it is just looking at taking educational courses or an ethnic studies upper division course once you sort of go through some lower division courses about how you can look at the different angles of law, sociology, history. And part of that experience too is not only the academic experience, is that knowing data, knowing information, knowing about some of the challenges or problems within a particular environment. A lot of our students want to be active. A lot of our students want to be able to either get experiences on whatever interest area that they are, but if we think about anti-racism as a specific area, is that they want to be able to do something about it. They want to be able to navigate and help other communities support and think through resolutions, whether that's a student organization, whether that's volunteer work, or whether that's their own activism and how that works. So I want to have a video for you that shows a little bit about the University of Oregon and activism that has continued on at the University of Oregon.
Education is the only means by which we can eliminate prejudice and racism, and in their place build compassion, tolerance, friendship, and the belief in the unconditional dignity of all men.
We have historically been eliminated from the decision-making processes that directly affect our lives.
We find ourselves without adequate advocacy.
Being a 60s student myself, you kind of think that everything really got started in the 60s, all of the change and agitation, and nothing could be further from the truth.
I first became aware of Herman when I was doing the project, but as I was working with him, that's also when I quickly realized that we didn't have as much material on African American history, particularly revolving around students. What's missing? What gaps do we need to fill?
Like Mabel Bird, she was by herself. She was probably the only black person in Eugene. She worked as a maid in one of the professor's houses and went to class. It was Robert Robinson and Charles Williams. They were the first two African-American athletes at the University of Oregon in 1926. The dormitories began to be integrated because of the white football players who were teammates of Robinson and Williams. They wrote a petition, and eventually it was done at Friendly Hall. They built a separate apartment with a separate entrance, but once they got into their apartment, they had access to the entire building where the other football players lived. They all had to overcome barriers to get an education at the University of Oregon.
The kind of minority communities we have in Oregon seem to be experiencing a kind of social and economic death that I think can be altered by inviting more and insisting more students getting through college.
Throughout that period, There was a lot of hostility on campus, because if you look back at the 60s, people were getting killed. When I remember walking across campus, people were screaming that the president had been shot, and so I ran to the dorm and talked to some other students, and finally we learned that our president had been killed. And then later on, Malcolm X was killed. Other civil rights leaders down south were getting killed. Bobby Kennedy was killed. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed.
Once again, our nation has been plunged into mourning as a result of an assassin striking down a truly great leader.
Black history is not a black club. It's history. Like Mabel Byrd, she worked with W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the most prominent civil rights figure in the 20s and 30s and up through the 40s. She was his right-hand person. Once you read her story, you have to be inspired.
We must all do our part to ensure that we create the beloved community that Dr. King envisions.
The one single factor that causes social change is people being determined that they're going to make it happen and not get discouraged, not get off the track. Even when things don't seem to be going well, you got to stay with it.
So to me, what that video really demonstrates is the University of Oregon experience and the way that you can have a transformative education. Really when I talk about requirements, I talk about choosing your career opportunities, that there's so many different things that you can do as a University of Oregon student so that you can actually have a really rich, full experience, and there's people here to support you. But sometimes it's the people who make the difference. It's the people who make the impact. These aren't new issues when we think about Black Lives Matter. They're not new. There have been sort of an issue that has come very visible within our media and then quietly sort of not as present, but it still impacts the lived experiences of African American people. It still impacts the people who care about these issues, the broader community that care about these issues. And it's activism that has moved so many different things that we think are sort of typical standards. When we look at the picture of students who were involved in the Black Student Union, many decades ago, they saw an issue that was impacting them very closely, and they wanted to do something about it. And it was their voice that made the difference. It was that voice that continues in what we're seeing today with many people around the country who are either really realizing for the first time that these issues around our criminal justice system and how it disproportionately impacts African Americans and Black and brown communities, whether that's poor communities, it's real to them now in a lot of different ways, and people want to know what they can do. A lot of other people have been working on these issues and are opening their arms to all the people who are really interested in figuring it out. Activism is something that actually has been a core thing of mine that I've been involved in since I was very young, and thinking about middle school and activities that I was involved in. It was my University of Oregon experience when I was here that studying ethnic studies as the major that I chose because I wanted to have an understanding of culture and identity and the ways in which our country was built and the impacts and contributions of a lot of our underrepresented communities. It wasn't just about that to me. It was about how can we make change. And if you want to think about anti-racism as a student, when you're here, we're committed at the University of Oregon to figure out ways to be better. Part of us being better is hearing from our students about how to do that, how to be involved in that. These books are very common books that you might have seen on different lists that are anti-racist readings that people are doing to try to learn more and discover more about themselves. These books, though, 4 years ago, were books that I was just finishing up using all my tools for the book that I wrote, because when I saw the Black Lives Matter movement happening in 2015, and students at the University of Oregon and students around the country were very engaged with these issues, but the topic area was very narrow. It was just on police brutality. And for me, I understand it as more systemic issues. And so I used a lot of these texts to actually work on my novel, my young adult novel, on it. And we actually were really fortunate to have not only Ibram Kendi come speak on our campus, but we also had Ta-Nehisi Coates come to our campus. That's the University of Experience about how do you actually be engaged in anti-racist work. It's not just about reading books. It's not just about taking classes. It's learning, it's engaging, it's doing more. It's becoming more comfortable with these topics. And when I started to write my book, I started to think about the Black experience, that what my America was. And Langston Hughes was a big sort of model for me in thinking about what America is through his poem, I Too Am America. So I wrote my novel, This Is My America. I wrote it with a main character named Tracy, who was a young adult whose father was wrongfully incarcerated, and her brother was accused of murdering someone. And they all were under the gauze of bias. They all weren't involved in those activities. And so I wanted to be able to tell a story that deals with all the issues that I was talking about earlier. When you think about taking one particular issue, that it's not just one thing, it's something systemic that you can actually study and understand in a lot of different ways. And I modeled the main character in my story to think about being an activist. Think about the students that I connect and work with who are relentless and fearless and want to make change. I covered a lot of different themes in my book. These are the kinds of things that as a student, when you want to think about anti-racism, in particular with our criminal justice system, that there's all kinds of different themes that you can cover, whether it's thinking specifically about our criminal justice system and what actually needs to be resolved or corrected or completely rehauled. If we think about specifically the legacy of racism and discrimination, and not only the impact of it, but actually the psycho and emotional impact of racism. Thinking about potential, the potential of people who have been sort of set on a path, whether they've lost their life because of racism and interaction, or their life is sort of set back. They don't get to have the dream that they want to be. And for us as a university, as a community, we want every single student, every single young person, every single older person, family member, to think about the ultimate experience that they can have, the dreams that they can have, the opportunities they can have, because it's a basic human right. So, you know, I'm having lots of different activities around my book. I didn't dig too much deep into my book because there's going to be lots of different ways. It comes out in 2 weeks. Really excited about it, and excited to be at the University of Oregon, where we're now really wanting to think about how can we do even more in thinking about anti-racist work. So.
Thank you, Kimberly. We have tons of questions that are coming in for you, so I hope that we can get to as many of these as we can, and we'll follow up with the students whose questions don't get answered live on camera. But the questions that are coming in range from advising and major specific things, but also ways in which students want to be involved in activism and support students, and want to know a little bit more about you. So hopefully you're up for all these questions. Zach wants to know, what are some of the struggles that you personally have gone through to get where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that, Zach. You know, I think a lot of things that really impact not just me, but other people that I know, and not just thinking about Oregon, but just in general, is the potential of possibility. Having to explain my experience, having to prove that I am either worthy of something or they have as much information, which, you know, caused me in a lot of ways, and I think a lot of people who really still want to do something about it, to try to work harder, to prove ourselves that we are more than enough, which isn't fair. It's not a burden that's fair to have to do because that there's a bias or discrimination that's there. I think, you know, for Black people, for underrepresented people, and a lot of different, you know, marginalities that they might have or intersections of identities that they have, there's this added burden that they have to do this heavy lift toward trying to resolve the other issue on the other end. And so, I think that sort of, doesn't talk a lot about what's my expectation for the people that I'm engaging with. And, I think for a lot of us, we're ready for people to realize that it's their opportunity to work through it. What is it like for me as an administrator, as a Black woman, on my campus in a leadership role? Those are challenges that are really all across the country and really trying to demonstrate who we are and how successful we are. And, I've always looked to my community. I've always looked to being involved so that I can find strength within myself so that I can continue to push forward and strive and dream. I don't want anyone stopping my dreams. And I wouldn't want that for students either.
Thank you for that. Sounds like the things that you have experienced also point to why it's so important for all of our students, but for Black identified students to have a network, a community that they find comfort and care in. One of the students asked us if you could explain a little bit more about the Black Cultural Center. And just so everyone who's watching is aware, we do have a session next Friday where we will introduce you to Eris Hall, who is the coordinator for the Black Cultural Center. But Kimberly, can you talk a little bit about the Black Cultural Center and what that means to our students, faculty, and staff here at the University of Oregon?
Yeah, our Black Cultural Center is there today because of the dreams of our students. They made a demand on the institution that they wanted a space that they could honor their culture and feel like they could have community. It's something that a lot of people don't, who aren't from an underrepresented background, don't really realize that when you are in a classroom and you don't have as many students that come from your similar background, how difficult it is trying to manage your experiences where you just actually want to fully present yourself as who you are and not have to sort of make yourself smaller or not take up as much space in a classroom because of considerations of bias. And the beauty of the Black Cultural Center is that it was the dream of the students, and I was really fortunate to be meet with a donor to help them sort of like think about how they can invest in the university and invest in the Black Cultural Center. And I also was able to be on the committee that did the design for it. And so I saw it from conception, from fundraising, from the development of it. And it's a beautiful, beautiful space. And it's a space that lives not only in person, but virtually. So now it's a convening space. And Dr. Eris Hall has done an incredible job to connect the community. And there's lots of opportunities for the university community in general to connect with the Black Cultural Center, but for our Black identified students in particular, I think that's a space that you can call home.
Thank you. Referring to your role as a mentor for some of our students, one of the students in the Q&A asked how they can address bias or racism if they experience it. What would you advise a student to do if they personally experience bias or racism on campus?
Yeah, I think, based on what kind of bias it is and who you're connected to on campus, there's actually a lot of different ways. There's a network of people across campus who are focused on looking at equity and inclusion on our campus. In my most immediate community, if there's a bias that's sort of happening within our underrepresented community, the Center for Multicultural Academic Excellence is an incredible unit with caring staff who are very well resourced. And so if you're not sure where to go, creating a relationship with them is a really great way. The Dean of Students office actually does have a team that works on bias, and so you actually can report those incidents online about it happening. Those that are in the residence hall, if it happens, the resident life community staff are very well versed in what they can not only have a reporting, but what does that look like in terms of code of conduct or to have engaged in a conversation. So there's lots of different ways. I always just share with students that if you have an advisor that you're actually working with, share that with your advisor. Our advisors across campus, we are committed to supporting our students and understanding understanding the role that we can play in helping advocate for our students. In terms of seeing bias, if you see it, you need to say something about it. It's not just the responsibility of the person who's receiving the action on it. We've done that too long. We've expected other people to do that and convene for themselves. But part of our civic engagement, our responsibility as humans on this planet is to care for other people. And if we see something that's wrong, if we hear something that's wrong, if we identify something that's wrong, that you need to engage in a conversation. And the last thing that I would say is that that feels uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I get that, but I have to navigate my life. Students have to navigate their life every single day where they feel uncomfortable at some moment, whether that's going into the store, whether that's getting in their car, whether that's driving, whether that's going to the park. That uncomfortable lives with you, and I promise you the outsider experience of observing it is nothing like the way it is for the person. And so the more you get comfortable with actually talking about race, thinking about race, listening from the other experiences that people have, it actually isn't that scary.
Thank you. We actually have lots of students who want to know a little bit more about activism and allyship. So one student asked, why do you think student activism is so valuable and important, not only on college campuses around the country, but on a larger national scale?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot. And, I think one of the reasons that throughout our history, movements have always had a very high portion of either young people who were involved in it or young people, who were heading it. If you look at Martin Luther King, he was a very young man when he was, beginning his activism. If you look at Claudette Colvin, who was before Rosa Parks, she was very young when she was doing her activism. And I think the real reason is because as a young person, you're still identifying and developing how you want to engage in the world. You're psychologically, it goes to the brain. Psychologically, you're trying to identify what is safe and unsafe, what are the rules in which that you navigate, and how you want to be and who you are as a person. And so you don't have this fixed sort of like understanding of how things. I think as you get older, you sort of see the way systems are, the way that structures are. And that's the beauty of young people, is because you're learning, you're asking questions. I think about my kids, or my youngest daughter who's 6, when she asks a question about why is that bird doing that thing? She's sort of understanding why the bird is living the way it is, and if it will harm her, and what are the rules around it. And it's sort of like inquisitiveness that happens. And that's sort of a very simple example about developing. And so young people, you see something wrong, you're gonna be like, what's wrong with that? Why are we doing that? This makes no sense. Or isn't there a better way? And I think about it, it's part of innovation. It's a part of evolving, as an entire species. We're constantly sort of evolving and developing, and young people are at such a part of it. We're not necessarily scared to lose your job, because you probably could get another job if you're working part-time. So you're willing to sort of push further than maybe someone who's settled and sort of figured out that, okay, this is how the system kind of works.
Yeah, that lack of a fixed mindset is really important in this age group, both for learning and thinking about things in new ways, but also the energy around changing the world. So I want to make sure that we get to, Elise has had a couple of great questions. And this goes into your advising wheelhouse. What are specific majors and minors that we as activists can pursue in order to make a difference when it comes to civil rights? All civil rights, BLM, LGBTQ+, ethnic rights, gender rights, etc.
Yeah, I think there's so many different ways. I think activism can occur in any major. And I use the sciences as an example all the time. When you think about people who want to pursue science and think about it, you can use your activism in so many different ways with that. But if we think sort of traditionally, we actually have disability studies, gender and sexuality studies, ethnic studies. We have Black Study minor courses that you can take. A lot of it is about even thinking about sociology from the inequalities of sociology. There's courses that you can take, and I always say that combine a course with an organization. And there's so many different organizations at the University of Oregon that you can be involved in. And I would talk with your advisors about your particular interests and sort of where you're coming from, and they can really help identify what are ways in which you can engage on campus and what are some classes that you actually can take. But those are just some of the examples that I listed.
Thank you. Elise has another question that's just really awesome. Are there particular clubs or groups at the U of O that I can participate in that are fully toward activism on civil rights?
Yeah, and I think when we talk, civil rights is really broad. I'd say that we don't necessarily have a student group just focus on that as a broad issue right now. Right, so that's the beauty of being a student, is that there's so many new issues that are occurring that a student can actually start their own student organization and get people involved and engaged in wanting to look at bigger issues. But there are some, historical organizations on campus, whether that's the Black Student Union or MECHA or, APASU, which is Asian Pacific, Islander Student Union Group. There's lots of different ways in which those groups innately have cultural components, but they also have some advocacy components. I think the other is looking at our ASUO, which is our student government. That is the government body for the university. It is the official voice of our students. And I think that, if you want to be engaged at the highest level, then you need to be going to the board meetings and you need to run for some of those positions so that your activism can be involved. There's lots of different ways to do it. And, again, I think that there's got to be something new that I think actually is going to happen in terms of students sort of seeing that maybe we actually haven't mobilized as an entire body in thinking about civil rights, that we all need to be unified in thinking about it, and it could be something new that's created. So whoever asked that question, I'm looking at them to be the one to start that.
Well, it's important to know too that you mentioned the ASUO and students pay an incidental fee, that the ASUO controls where that money goes, and so they actually have a voice in terms of what money gets spent on and things like that with regard to student activities and many of the things that address issues of civil rights and student activism. So it's important for Elise was our question asker, to know that she certainly has an opportunity to play a big role in that. So one more that I want to make sure that we have a chance to ask. Liam wants to know, how is UO different from other universities in the way that these messages of equity and social issues are taught?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Liam. I think that almost every university that I've seen is trying to work towards doing something, or they've lifted statements. I think something that's very different about the University of Oregon is that if you look at our administration that we actually have here, we're not as a very diverse state. I mean, that's just it's a very obvious thing at the University of Oregon. But if you look at our leadership, look at who is the head of our vice president for the Division of Equity and Inclusion, our vice president for student life, our vice president for the Division of Undergraduate, vice provost for a Division of Undergraduate Education and Student Success, who's at the head of the music school, who's at the head of the law school, who's at the head of financial aid. You actually have administrative representation that are part of the president's circle. And I think the beauty of that is not only having the student voices, but now having administrators who can work on that. It is something that University of Oregon needs to work on. I think, again, it's something that every university needs to work on, but I do think that the University of Oregon needs to work on, and I'm just speaking really just as a person who cares about these issues. I've been proud of the university and putting out a very sort of clear message, even connected to orientation. Cora, your words to talking about Black Lives Matter, that meant a lot to me, and I know that meant a lot to students. And so I think for me, if you found a love for the University of Oregon, and there's a reason why you're watching these sessions, you can go a lot of places. Change needs to happen in a lot of places. And I would love for students who care about these issues and want to make the world a better place, I would love for them to do that at the University of Oregon, because their voice helps push us to change, push us to do things that we need to do differently. So I think something that is really to look out for is that the university the past couple of years has had an African American workshop speaker series where we have brought in amazing speakers that visit top institutions all across the country, and I think that kind of access in a closer kind of way that we can actually do at the University of Oregon is also a great way for us to be a part of making change. So.
Well, thank you so much. That's all the time that we have this morning. Students, please be sure to complete the short reflection on this session, excuse me, in the community.uoregon.edu course. Pardon me. This helps us track your attendance at these sessions. If you have additional questions related to this program or anything related to introduction, please visit our website, orientation.uoregon.edu, or you can email us at orientation@uoregon.edu, and you can always text our office at 541-346-1159. Thank you so much for your time and attention today watching this program, and to you, Kimberly, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Cora.